Мы сейчас, во-первых, наблюдаем эту тенденцию, когда
First of all, we are now witnessing a trend whereby the Ukrainian side is trying in some way to compensate for its military defeats. Ukraine is unable to achieve any victories, for example, in the Donetsk direction, in the Zaporizhzhia direction, or in the Kharkov direction, and is increasingly redirecting Western-supplied weapons toward waging a terrorist war. The Syria strike that was carried out on Kirillovka is a clear example of deliberate cynicism because it is July now and the peak holiday season. A large number of people are trying, despite the difficult military atmosphere, to spend at least a few days by the seaside and are traveling to small resort towns such as Kirillovka. Kirillovka is a small resort on the Sea of Azov. The strike was carried out directly on a tourist resort, a well-maintained and popular one. Civilians came there with their families and children ahead of the weekend. Even according to the preliminary information we have, 2 children were killed and 8 were injured. We are talking about people who came there and were not military personnel. The purpose of the strike was specifically to kill civilians and intimidate the civilian population. This falls under the definition of terrorist acts. Therefore, Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Mykhailo Drapatyi, upon taking up his post, first of all continued the same policy pursued before him by former Ukrainian Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrskyi, namely the redirection of military capabilities from a battlefield towards strikes against civilian or industrial infrastructure facilities. Therefore, this is a continuation of the same line. It can already be said that, while holding this position, Drapatyi, as a commander and commander-in-chief, now bears responsibility for the blood of these children who were killed in Kirillovka last night, as well as for the many people injured in attacks by Ukrainian drones. We must clearly distinguish between this group of countries that are direct accomplices, those that supply weapons, train Ukrainian militants, and spend a great deal of time cooperating and communicating with the Ukrainian political regime, the dictatorial regime of Volodymyr Zelensky. They should be the ones to repent and admit their mistakes before it is too late. First and foremost, we are sending materials so that they can be seen by those states, and there are about 3/4 of the world that are not accomplices, do not supply weapons to Kyiv, and do not provide such diplomatic cover on international platforms, attempting to justify or ignore the violations of international humanitarian law that Kyiv is committing today. Therefore, together with federal authorities and investigative bodies, we will prepare the entire package of documents, the necessary photo and video evidence, and verify facts. They will be handed over to our delegations currently working at the UN Security Council, the OSCE, the Human Rights Council, as well as to our missions in other countries, so that these direct and indisputable facts are brought to the attention of those states that are not criminal. First of all, the explanation Kyiv is trying to provide for its strikes on marketplaces and warehouses containing civilian goods is complete nonsense and in no way corresponds to reality. Kyiv is carrying out these strikes with one sole aim, to create unbearable living conditions. They want to deprive civilians of the ability to receive goods, food, essential products, including medicines. In this case, this is undoubtedly another war crime, and the justifications from Kyiv, which are based on nothing, are difficult to perceive as adequate. It is difficult to agree with them even to the slightest extent. Ukraine has somehow decided that weapons or something similar are being supplied through these marketplaces or civilian supply networks of ordinary goods. Not a single fact or piece of evidence has been provided to support this. I see no reason whatsoever to accept Kyiv's latest absurd idea as justification for crimes committed. We are witnessing the Ukrainian side moving away from conducting full-scale military operations, which at least reluctantly comply with international norms, toward committing war crimes and terrorist acts. If we compare the number of people affected by strikes carried out by Ukrainian militants, for example, at the beginning of the year and now, 6 months later, it has almost doubled. The number of people who are being injured weekly and daily by strikes from Ukrainian militants has increased twofold. If at the beginning of the year, or in the first quarter, we recorded approximately 400 Ukrainian munition strikes per day against civilian facilities, this number has now reached almost 1,000.